Imagine for a moment that everything that has happened to you in life, the good and the bad, has a special meaning. It sounds hard to believe, right? Well, hold on tight, because what you are about to hear today could change the way you see things forever. Have you ever wondered why certain things happen to you? Why sometimes it feels like everything is going wrong. Maybe you are going through a tough time right now and it all seems senseless. But what if I told you none of this is by chance? Today, God has an incredibly important message for you. Trust me, I am not wrong. Everything happens for a reason. Everything has a divine purpose. Yes, you read that correctly. Every experience you have, every challenge you face, every door that closes is part of a greater plan. Sometimes we feel lost, like life is just one big, confusing mess. But what if you could see it from God's perspective? Imagine understanding that the pain you are feeling now is actually preparing you for something amazing. You are on the verge of discovering God's master plan for your life. Nothing you go through is a mistake. Get ready, because what you are about to learn will not only give you hope, but it will fill you with an indescribable peace. But before we move on, I want you to do something important. Write "God, I trust in you" in the comments below. By doing so, you are declaring your trust in God's plan for your life, even when you don't fully understand it. I invite you to stay with us until the end of this video, and if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Now, let's take a look at Proverbs 19:21. There are many plans in a man's heart, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. We often get so focused on our own plans, dreams, and goals that we forget here is a bigger picture. This verse reminds us of that. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. Everyone has plans. We all want to achieve something. Make our lives go in a certain direction. Maybe you've got a list of goals for the year, or you are dreaming of a bright future. That's perfectly natural. But what we sometimes overlook is that despite how many plans we make, it's only God's purpose that will stand. It's easy to fall into the illusion that we have control over everything, that with enough effort and planning, we can shape our lives perfectly. The truth is, though, even with the best of intentions, our plans are limited. We only see a small part of the picture, while God sees everything: the past, the present, and the future, and He understands how it all fits together in a way we can't even imagine. Have you ever made plans that seemed perfect, only for everything to fall apart? Maybe you thought you had everything figured out, but life took a sudden and unexpected turn. We all go through that. The reality is, our plans aren't foolproof. Sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes the roads we choose aren't the right ones, and sometimes we just hit obstacles we never saw coming. In those moments, it's easy to feel frustrated and wonder if all our effort was wasted. But what if those setbacks, those unexpected changes, are actually signs that God is guiding us towards something better? This is why trusting in God's purpose is so important. When things don't go as we planned, it's tempting to lose hope. But let me tell you this, God's purpose is always better than anything we can imagine, even when we don't fully understand it. When it hurts, or when it feels like everything is falling apart, remember that God is working for your good. If you trust His guidance, you'll realize that even if you are not on the path you envisioned, you are still walking the path you were meant to walk. I know it's hard to let go of control. We all want to feel secure, to know we're in charge of our lives. But the truth is, real freedom comes when we surrender to God's purpose. When we stop trying to control everything and let God guide us, that's when we experience true peace. That doesn't mean we can't dream or plan, but it does mean we must be willing to lay those plans down before God and say, "Lord, let your will be done." One of the most valuable lessons we can learn is humility. Sometimes our plans are motivated more by ego than a true desire to follow God's will. This is where we need to stop and ask ourselves, am I chasing my dreams? Or am I pursuing the dreams that God has for me? It's a delicate balance, but when we are willing to submit our desires to God's will, we will see that His ways are always better than ours. God's purpose is unwavering. It doesn't change with circumstances or our failures. He knows the beginning and the end of our story, and every twist and turn along the way is part of a bigger plan designed for our good. That constancy is what can bring us peace, especially when life feels uncertain. So, when your plans don't work out like you hoped, don't despair. God is in control. His purpose will prevail. Even if you can't see it right now, trust that God is at work in every detail, leading you toward a future better than anything you could have planned for yourself. Now, let's take a look at Isaiah 46:10. I declare the end from the beginning, from ancient times, things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt overwhelmed because you can't see what lies ahead? It's that feeling of uncertainty that we all experience at some point, not knowing how things will turn out or where we're headed. But here is something I want you to remember. God doesn't just know the future. He declares it. In Isaiah 46:10, God says, I declare the end from the beginning. Think about that for a moment. Before anything even happens, God already knows how it will all unfold. This changes everything. While we see only small pieces of the present, God sees the entire picture. He knows every moment of our lives, past, present, and future. And He's already prepared the path ahead of us. So, when we face uncertainty, remember that God is the one who holds our future in His hands. We often worry about what's ahead, but God sees the entire story from start to finish. He's already seen it all, and nothing surprises Him. There are no unforeseen events for God. Every moment of your life, every unexpected turn is known to Him and perfectly planned for you. What might seem out of control to us is crystal clear to God. And here is the beautiful truth. Not only does God know the future, He controls it. His sovereignty is absolute. Here is nothing in this universe that happens outside of His divine plan, and through that, He grants us a great deal of freedom. There are times when things don't go as we expect, and it may feel like something went wrong or that somehow God lost control of the situation. But that is not the case. God is in full control of every detail and every circumstance, and His purpose will be accomplished no matter what. There is no force that can stop His plan. This is one of the greatest sources of peace we can experience. God's plan doesn't change. He established it from the very beginning, and nothing in this world can alter it. This means no matter what you face, God's purpose will be fulfilled. You may not always understand why things happen, and it may not make sense in the moment, but God's will is unstoppable. What He has decided to do, He will do. When you hold on to this truth, a deep sense of peace can wash over you, even amid uncertainty. I know there are times when everything feels confusing and you wonder if things will work out, or if you are even on the right path. But here is the key. God isn't confused. What to you may seem uncertain or chaotic, to Him is clear and perfectly laid out. His vision isn't limited by time or circumstance. He sees everything. If we trust in His perfect knowledge, we can rest assured that no matter what happens, God is in control. This brings us to something beautiful: assurance. You can trust that God's purpose for your life will come to fruition. Here is nothing that can stop it. The difficulties, the obstacles, and even the doubts, none of these can prevent God's plan from unfolding. And that plan is good, even if it doesn't always feel that way. Even when the road is tough, God has a perfect purpose for you. When you hold on to that truth, you can face anything, knowing that in the end, His will prevail. That's why T here is hope in God's plan. He already knows your future, He has planned it, and declared it from the beginning. Even though you may not see how things will work out right now, you can be confident that God is at work. His promises will be fulfilled no matter what you are facing in the present. That is the hope that keeps us steadfast. No matter how uncertain the present may be, the future is secure in the hands of a sovereign God who sees the end from the beginning. Let's look at Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Let me ask you, have you ever wondered if your life has a true purpose? Or whether the difficult circumstances you are going through have any meaning, or if it's all just random chaos? Well, T here is a promise in Jeremiah 29:11 that reminds us of something crucial. God has a plan for you. And it's not just any plan. It's a plan full of good things designed to give you a hopeful future. That's a truth that changes everything. The first thing we need to remember is that God is in total control. He's not improvising or making things up as He goes. Every situation, no matter how complex it may seem, is under His direction. There are no accidents or coincidences in your life. God knows exactly what He's doing, even when we can't see the bigger picture. And His plan is always for your good. Even if we can't understand it right now, trust that His intentions are pure. Notice the context of this verse. God spoke these words to the people of Israel who were exiled in Babylon. Imagine how they felt, far from home in a foreign land, feeling like everything they knew had been taken away. Yet, in the middle of that darkness, God reminded them that He had not forgotten them. He promised them a future full of hope, even when their circumstances seemed hopeless. And you know what? That same message is true for you today. In your darkest moments, when everything seems to be falling apart, God still has a plan. He hasn't forgotten you. You might be wondering, how does this apply to my life today? Look around you. We all face difficulties and challenges that seem pointless at times. But I assure you, God is working on something far greater. The answers you are seeking may not come right away, but that doesn't mean God isn't moving in your life. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected forms. God is preparing something incredible for you, and even if you can't see it now, it will come. When the Bible talks about well-being, it's not just talking about living a comfortable, trouble-free life. Well-being, in the biblical context, is far deeper. It's a life full of purpose, peace, and spiritual growth. It's a state of wholeness that can only be found when we align ourselves with God's will. The challenges we face aren't meaningless. They're tools God uses to shape us and prepare us for what lies ahead. The struggles you face today might seem overwhelming, but they serve a purpose. Each trial has the potential to build your character, teach you valuable lessons, and get you ready for the blessings God has planned. No tear is wasted in God's plan. Every tear, every challenge is part of something greater. God sees far beyond what we can see right now, and even though we might not always understand why we're going through certain things, we can trust that it's all part of His divine plan. What God promises in this verse is not an empty hope. It's a certain reality. His faithfulness is unwavering, and the future He has for you doesn't depend on your performance or failures. It depends solely on His love and His promises. That future is full of peace, fulfillment, and most importantly, His presence. Because at the end of the day, what matters most is that God is with us. He is by our side every step of the way. So, in times of uncertainty, when you don't know what tomorrow holds, remember this: God is with you. God is in control, and He knows every detail of your life. Don't despair if things don't go as planned. Your story is not over yet. The best part is that the author of your story is the same God who promised to give you a future full of hope. So don't give up and don't lose faith. God is still at work, and His plans for you are still unfolding. Romans 8:28 says, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This is a powerful truth, though it may be hard to fully grasp. God has a purpose in everything that happens to you. I know it can be difficult to see this when things seem more chaotic than ordered, when T here is more pain than joy, but in this verse, God promises something extraordinary. He works all things for the good of those who love Him. And when God says all things, He really means all things 7, the darkest moments, the ones we don't understand, the moments that make us question, why me? Think about it for a moment. The challenges you face, the ones that shake your life, are not accidents. God leaves nothing to chance. Even when everything seems like a mess, God is weaving something beautiful behind the scenes. T here is a perfect plan in motion that we can't fully see from our limited perspective. It's as if we're looking at only a small part of the canvas while God has already painted the whole picture. And here is the hardest truth to accept. For God's plan to unfold in our lives, we have to surrender completely to it. This means total trust that goes beyond what we can understand. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well, but what happens when things don't make sense? That's where true faith comes into play. Loving God means being willing to follow His purpose, even when we don't understand the path. After all, who knows better than God what we truly need? Sometimes it feels like God is silent during our trials, but let me remind you, just because you don't hear Him doesn't mean He's not working. God doesn't abandon His children. Even when it feels like everything is falling apart, He's there molding, preparing you for something much bigger. You may not see it now, but every step, every tear, every unanswered question is forming something powerful within you. Trials, though difficult, are tools God uses to bring you closer to Him, to teach you to depend entirely on His strength. Here is a key point we sometimes misunderstand. When God says He works for our good, He doesn't mean for our material well-being or earthly success. No, His goal is to shape us into the image of Christ. Have you ever stopped to think that those challenges, disappointments, and even losses are designed to make you more like Jesus? It's tough to accept, I know, but every stroke of life's canvas is sculpting your character, drawing you nearer to the spiritual maturity God desires for you. Don't think of this as a generic promise. Each of us has a unique calling and a specific purpose, and you are no exception. The ultimate well-being God promises you is directly tied to this divine purpose. Though we won't always understand the path we're walking, we must trust that He will guide us toward that destination. Keeping faith in the midst of uncertainty is difficult, but it is precisely in these times that our relationship with God is strengthened the most. And finally, I want to talk to you about something we all need: patience. You won't always see immediate results. Sometimes it will feel like God is delaying, but I assure you, He's working on every detail of your life. The key is not to lose faith. Keep going because God is there, building something beautiful out of the difficulties you face today. The process may be long, but His work in your life will be perfect. So, the next time you face a trial, remember this: God is with you every step of the way. He never leaves anything to chance, and your life is full of purpose. Even in the most difficult times, your story is unfolding perfectly according to His plan. Psalm 103:19 says, "The Lord has established His throne in the heavens, and His kingdom rules over all." This is something we all need to remember, especially when it feels like things are out of control. God is on his throne, and his kingdom reigns over everything. It's not just a comforting phrase, it's a profound truth found in Psalm 103-19. God, the creator of the universe, is sitting on his heavenly throne, and nothing escapes his control. Not one single thing in this world happens outside of his sovereignty. It's easy to forget this when we look around and see chaos, uncertainty, or injustice. But even though things may seem out of place here on earth, God still reigns. He is not like earthly kings whose decisions may be questionable or whose reigns are temporary. God's reign is absolute. He is in control of everything from the greatest, such as the destinies of nations, to the smallest, like the deepest concerns of your life. Here is no detail that escapes his notice. And this brings us to a beautiful truth. His kingdom is eternal and unchanging. While human kingdoms rise and fall, while governments change, the kingdom of God remains firm. Sometimes, it may seem like evil is winning, or that injustices are prevailing, but what we don't see is that the kingdom of God is still standing, and his justice will always prevail. It might not be in the time or manner we expect, but God's justice is unwavering. When everything seems to be out of control, there is comfort in knowing that God has not lost control. He is not surprised by what is happening in the world or in your life. He sees everything. Every situation, every detail is under his supervision, and nothing happens without his permission. This doesn't mean we won't face difficulties, but it does mean we can rest in his unquestionable authority. No matter how big our problems seem, God is still on the throne. It's easy to lose sight of this when we focus only on what we see here on earth. We see powers shifting, injustices being done, and chaos all around. But in those moments, remember that God reigns supreme and his plan is moving forward. Sometimes it seems like governments and systems have the final say, like they hold the ultimate power. But the truth is, God is the one who has ultimate control. No matter who is in power here on earth, true power resides in the heavenly throne. The kingdom of God is unshaken by political decisions or historical events. Even though we may not always see how God is at work behind the scenes, moving the pieces to accomplish his perfect will, we can be sure of one thing: God's righteousness is perfect. We live in a world where injustice sometimes prevails, but God is the just judge. The promise that God never abandons those who seek him is also an invitation. No matter how many times we have failed, no matter how far away we have felt from him, we can always turn back. His love is not measured by our performance. His faithfulness does not depend on our perfection. When we seek him with sincerity, he is always there, ready to receive us, to strengthen us, and to show us the way. This truth not only fills us with hope, but also gives us purpose. When we live with the confidence that God never abandons us, our life becomes a witness to those around us. Our faith inspires others to seek that same peace that we find in his presence. It becomes a beacon of light in a world that so often feels lost and without direction. So when you find yourself in the midst of uncertainty, when the questions are bigger than the answers, remember these words. Those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, never forsake those who seek you. This verse is not just a promise, it's an invitation to live a life of full trust, knowing that no matter what you face, God is there with you. Seek his face, trust in his name, and allow his faithfulness to transform every aspect of your life. He will never leave you, and that assurance is all you need to face any circumstance. Matthew 28-20. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. These words spoken by Jesus himself are more than just a promise. They are an eternal covenant, a declaration of faithfulness that assures us we will never be alone, no matter what we face in this life. This verse invites us to reflect on the depth of God's love and presence that transcends time and space, no matter the circumstance. Imagine what these words meant to the disciples. After Jesus' resurrection, he gave them a monumental mission to go and make disciples of all nations. It was a commission that surely seemed overwhelming, a challenge they faced with a world full of uncertainty and opposition. But Jesus did not leave them alone. He assured them that his presence would be with them every step of the way. That same promise is for us today. When Jesus says he is with us always, he's not limited by the conditions of our lives. He's not saying he will be with us only when things are going well or when we are perfect. He promises to be present at all times in victories and failures, in joy and pain, in moments of clarity and in those of confusion. His presence does not depend on our circumstances or our emotions. It is a constant, a reminder that his love is unwavering. Sometimes we feel alone, as if no one understands what we're going through. This verse breaks that lie. Jesus is not only present in a symbolic or abstract way. His presence is real, active, tangible. He is with you in the moments when you feel that you can't take it anymore, when the burden is too heavy and the strength seems to fade. He is there, holding you, guiding you, giving you the necessary encouragement to continue. "I will be with you always" is also an invitation to walk with him. When you know that you are not alone, that the same Jesus who overcame death is by your side, fear begins to fatten not because the problems disappear magically, but because you know that you have someone far greater than any challenge facing you. It is a security that allows you to move forward, even in the most uncertain terrains, knowing that his power and his love back you up. This promise not only comforts us, but it also impels us to fulfill the purpose he has given us. Jesus does not ask us to face life and its challenges on our own. He asks us to face them with him, to be equipped, strengthened, and guided every step of the way. He does not call us to great things hoping that we will do them alone. He assures us that he will be present, guiding every step, opening paths, and filling us with his wisdom. The end of the verse, "until the end of the world," is a reminder that his presence has no expiration date. No matter how much time passes, no matter how far away the end seems to be, Jesus will be there. His faithfulness is not temporary, it is eternal. This gives us a hope that nothing in this world can take away from us. It assures us that even in the darkest moments, his light will always be with us. But this promise also calls us to respond. If we know Jesus is with us, how does that change the way we face life? How does it encourage us to trust more deeply, to act boldly, to live with purpose? His presence transforms not only our relationship with him, but also the way we interact with the world. It gives us the confidence to know that we do not walk alone, and that with him, everything is possible. As we walk with this certainty, our lives become a reflection of his love and his faithfulness. When we are able to trust in him and face challenges with confidence, others see our peace in the midst of the storm. They are drawn to know the God who makes all that possible. We become living witnesses of what it means to have Jesus with us always, until the end of the world. So when doubts try to fill you with fear, when the road seems solitary, remember these words. "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." These are not just words spoken 2,000 years ago. They are a living, active promise that is still true today. Jesus is with you now and always. His presence is your strength, your guide, and your eternal hope. Trust in him, for he will never leave you, never forsake you, and will be with you to the end. Psalm 37-25. I was young, and now I am old. Yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken, or their children begging for bread. These words are a declaration of God's faithfulness throughout a lifetime. It is the testimony of someone who has lived long enough to see God's hand in action, someone who recognizes that those who walk in righteousness trusting in the Lord, are never abandoned. This verse invites us to reflect on what it means to live a righteous life and how God provides even in the most difficult times. When the psalmist says, "I was young and now I am old," he is reminding us that his experience is not momentary or based on fleeting emotions. It is the testimony of a lifetime observing God's goodness from the days of his youth, until maturity has seen God act consistently in favor of the righteous. This does not mean that the righteous will never face problems. Rather, it means that they are never alone in the midst of them. God always finds a way to provide, to take care of, and to uphold them. The righteousness mentioned here is not an impossible perfection to attain, but a life lived in integrity, seeking to please God, trusting in His Word, and walking in faith even when the path is not clear. The promise is not that the righteous will have a life without problems, but that in the midst of them, God will never forsake them. He will sometimes provide in ways that are not what we expect, but always at the right time. Think about it. How many times in your life have you faced a need that seemed insurmountable? Perhaps you have been in situations where the future looked uncertain, where fear of helplessness or scarcity invaded you. This verse reminds us that even in those moments, God is faithful. He sees our needs and responds, not always in the way we imagine, but always in the way we truly need. He never lets His children be left helpless. When the psalmist says he has never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging for bread, he is highlighting the generational nature of God's faithfulness. His provision does not only impact our lives, but also the lives of our families. When we live in obedience and trust in Him, our actions sow seeds of blessing that extend to those around us. God not only cares about what we face today, He is also caring for our tomorrow and those who depend on us. This verse also challenges us to trust God even when the provision doesn't seem evident. Sometimes we face periods of scarcity or difficulty that test our faith. It is in those moments that we need to remember that God always has a plan. Perhaps His provision is not immediate, but His time will come. It is perfect, and His promise is that He will never leave us alone. It is a call to keep the faith, even when our circumstances seem to contradict it. God's faithfulness also invites us to live generously. If we know that God will always provide for our needs, why not share what we have with those in need? This verse is not only a reminder that God cares for the righteous, but also a call to be an instrument of His provision in the lives of others. When we share what we have received, we become living witnesses of God's goodness, reflecting His character to a world in dire need. This shows that no matter what stage of life we are in, we can trust in God's faithfulness. He will never change. What He did for the psalmist, He will do for us. His provision, His care, and His love have no limit or expiration date. From our youth to our old age, His hand is upon us, guiding and sustaining us. So when fear of helplessness or scarcity knocks at your door, come back to this verse. I was young, and I have grown old, and I have never seen a righteous man forsaken, nor his children begging for bread. It is more than just an affirmation. It is an invitation to trust in the God who never fails. His fidelity is sure, His provision is sure, and His love for you is eternal. Live with that certainty, because the God who cared for the righteous in the past is still the same today. He will not leave you. He will not forsake you. He will always be with you, providing at every moment, in every season of your life. 1 Peter 5-7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. God's plan for us is much bigger than we can comprehend, and it's woven into the fabric of our salvation. Not only did He predestine us to be saved, but He also designed us for spiritual growth and transformation into the image of Christ. This gives us incredible certainty. Our salvation is assured, and nothing can separate us from God's eternal love and care. Living in the light of this truth means living with the awareness that we are God's chosen people. We seek His purpose in every decision, in every day, trusting that we are never alone in our struggles. God is working everything for His glory. When doubts arise or when difficult times come, we can find comfort in knowing that God has a plan and we are part of that beautiful, eternal design. Just as He knows the number of hairs on our head, He knows the path we take, and no trial is outside His control. Job 23:10 gives us a powerful image of God's awareness of our trials. He knows the path I take. When He has tested me, I will come out like gold. Trials are not random, they serve a divine purpose. They are often compared to the refining of gold, where the goldsmith applies heat to remove impurities and bring out its true value. In the same way, God uses trials to purify and strengthen us. Every difficulty we face is part of the transformation process. We may not see the purpose in the moment, but as we endure, we become stronger, purer, and more focused on what truly matters. God's timing in these trials is never arbitrary. He knows exactly how much heat we can handle and how long we need to be refined. We often struggle with patience, wanting the pain to end quickly, but God knows the perfect moment for each step. Just as the goldsmith watches over the process, God is with us every step of the way. If you feel burdened, know that God is not far away. He is present, guiding, and ensuring that the result is a reflection of His glory. Everything you are going through has divine purpose. When you trust in Him, you will emerge as a stronger, more valuable creation, reflecting His light more fully. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us that everything has its time, and everything that is wanted under heaven has its time. We often feel frustrated when things don't happen according to our timeline, when prayers go unanswered or dreams don't come true as quickly as we want. But God's perfect plan includes His timing for every event, every situation. Life has its seasons just as nature does. Sometimes we must wait for things to unfold at their appointed time. This waiting is not inactivity. It's an act of faith. Just as winter gives way to spring, our trials will eventually pass, and better days will come. Trusting in God's timing means we don't rush or force things. We trust that He will provide exactly what we need when the time is right. Learning to live within the rhythm of God's timing can transform our perspective. Whether you are in a season of sowing, waiting, or facing hardship, remember that each stage has its purpose. Even seasons of pain or uncertainty serve to shape you. Just as spring follows winter, difficulties will eventually pass. Success and abundance, too, are temporary, and learning to embrace each stage is the key. When we trust in God's timing, we avoid unnecessary struggles and mistakes. We receive exactly what we need when we need it, and that trust allows us to live more peacefully in the flow of His perfect plan. Surrendering the need to control every aspect of our lives frees us from a great burden. We often carry stress and anxiety because we believe that everything depends on us. But when we realize that God's plan is much greater and He is in control of the times and seasons, we can experience peace. Trusting in this divine process allows us to live with a sense of comfort, even when things are difficult or uncertain. We no longer need to panic when life doesn't go as planned, because we know that God is orchestrating something perfect, and He will fulfill His plan at the right moment. Accepting that our desires may not always materialize immediately brings us peace. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us that everything has its time. In times of success, we can enjoy those moments knowing they are part of life's cycle, and in seasons of struggle, we can trust that God is still working. The key is to accept that while we may not understand the why immediately, God's plan is always fulfilled at the right moment, and in that confidence, we find rest. Isaiah 55:8 tells us that God's ways and thoughts are far beyond ours. Sometimes we think we have everything figured out, our plans, our steps, our future. But life throws a curveball, and we find ourselves questioning God. Yet, Isaiah reminds us that God sees the bigger picture. While we see only a small piece of the puzzle, God holds the entire picture in His hands. His ways may seem confusing to us, but they are designed to take us to a better place, even if we don't understand the journey at the time. It's not about knowing all the answers, but trusting that God is guiding us to where we need to be. Trusting God when life doesn't make sense is one of the greatest tests of our faith. It's easy to trust when everything is going well, but what happens when we don't have the answers? What happens when life feels like it's falling apart? It's in those moments that our trust in God's wisdom truly grows. God is orchestrating a beautiful and perfect plan for our lives, even if we can't see it immediately. Isaiah's metaphor, the heavens are higher than the earth, reminds us that God's wisdom is incomprehensible. We must learn to let go of control, accept that we won't always understand, and find peace in His sovereignty. Romans 11:33 tells us that the riches of God's wisdom and knowledge are unfathomable. As human beings, we can only grasp a small fraction of God's infinite wisdom. While we try to make sense of the events around us, God sees the entire scope of history, past, present, and future. What might seem like an inexplicable situation to us is part of God's eternal plan. He understands not only the visible, but also the invisible, the behind-the-scenes reasons for everything that happens in our lives. When we trust in God's wisdom, we can rest in the certainty that He is working everything for good, even when it doesn't make sense at the moment. God's judgments may be difficult for us to comprehend. We may feel confused, frustrated, or even hurt by situations that seem unfair. But the reality is that God's judgments are perfect, even when we don't understand them. It's like looking through foggy glass. We can't see clearly, but God sees perfectly. Trusting in His wisdom means surrendering our need for control, accepting that His understanding far surpasses ours, and finding peace in knowing that He is always working for our good. In the end, the greatest act of faith is to trust in God's plan even when we can't understand it. Letting go of our desire to know every detail and simply trusting in His wisdom allows us to experience true peace and rest. God's ways are inscrutable, impossible to trace, but that's what makes Him God. If we could understand everything, then He wouldn't be the infinite God we believe in. Trusting in Him, even in the face of uncertainty, is what ultimately leads us to true freedom. When we accept that we don't have all the answers and that God is in control, we find rest and peace, knowing that His plan will always be fulfilled at the perfect time. When we acknowledge that our relationship with God is built on trust, even in the face of uncertainty, it strengthens our faith. Sometimes the most important prayer we can offer is, "God, I don't understand, but I trust that You do." Instead of living in frustration or anxiety, we can embrace a sense of awe and reverence before God's greatness. Each day presents us with an opportunity to admire His wisdom and recognize that He knows what we cannot see. This awe leads to deeper worship, filling our hearts with gratitude. When life doesn't make sense, it's comforting to remember that God is in control, and trusting Him brings incredible peace. Even in times of doubt, we don't need to have all the answers. We only need to know that God is guiding us. In those moments when we feel lost or confused, remembering that God's wisdom is unfathomable allows us to rest in His divine control. His judgments may seem indecipherable, but they are always perfect. God's ways may not always align with our understanding, but His purpose is always unfolding in our lives. By resting in the truth that He is orchestrating everything, we can release our anxiety and trust that His plan is perfect, even when we can't see it. Isaiah 40:28 gives us another powerful truth about God's nature. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the eternal God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow weary or tired, and his understanding is beyond measure. How comforting it is to know that while we experience exhaustion and limitations, God never grows weary. As humans, we are constrained by time, but God exists outside of time, eternal and unchanging. He is never limited by the passing of days or years. If God is eternal and never wears out, it means that He is always available to sustain us, providing the strength we need in every circumstance. God's infinite power and eternal nature give us assurance that we can trust Him, knowing that He is never fatigued and will never run out of energy or wisdom. When we feel overwhelmed, it's easy to forget that the same God who created the universe also holds our lives in His hands. He is not bound by our limitations, but works tirelessly on our behalf. God's strength is inexhaustible, and when we find ourselves weak, He is there, offering His strength to carry us through. This truth invites us to practice humility and recognize that we don't need to understand everything because God does. His wisdom is perfect, and we can trust that He is working everything together for our good. Psalm 145. 17 tells us that the Lord is righteous in all His ways and kind in all His works. This verse reminds us that God is both just and kind at all times. He doesn't fluctuate between being just and being kind. His nature is perfectly unified, and both qualities are expressed simultaneously. God's justice is not like human justice. It is not based on external rules or standards. Rather, God is the standard of what is just. Every decision He makes, every action He takes, is right and pure. Even when life seems unfair, we can trust that God's justice is perfect, and He is always working for our good. God's goodness is not limited to human kindness. His goodness is infinite, expressed in everything He does, from the beauty of creation to the blessings we receive every day. Even in our suffering, God's goodness remains constant. His grace gives us far more than we deserve, and His compassion is unchanging. It is this perfect combination of justice and goodness that allows us to trust God even in our most challenging moments. When life feels chaotic or when we experience injustice, we can remember that God is still just and kind, and His wisdom governs all situations. No matter what we face, God is in control, and His purposes are always good. When we find ourselves in situations that seem unfair or confusing, it's important to remember that our perspective is limited. We only see a fragment of the picture, but God sees the whole story, past, present, and future. Even when we don't understand why we are suffering, we can trust that God's justice and goodness are working together for our benefit. Sometimes God allows us to go through difficulties to strengthen our faith, purify our hearts, and bring about His greater purpose in our lives. Through it all, God's justice and kindness remain, and He will always lead us to a place of peace, even if the road is difficult. In the midst of our trials, we can always trust in God's goodness. It's not that He has abandoned us in our pain, but that He is present in every moment, guiding and caring for us. His goodness doesn't disappear during difficult times. In fact, it is during these moments that His compassion becomes even more evident. It's easy to see God's goodness when life is smooth, but it's in the storms that His presence and care shine the brightest. He understands our weaknesses and is with us every step of the way, offering strength and comfort when we need it most. How then do we live in the light of God's divine justice and goodness? First, we must recognize that God is always faithful, no matter what challenges we face. His character is unchanging, and we can trust Him to act justly and kindly in every situation. In our relationships and decisions, we are called to reflect the same justice and goodness that God shows to us, being fair and compassionate toward others. If ever we doubt how God's justice and goodness can coexist with a world full of suffering and injustice, Remember that God sees beyond what we can see. His plan is far greater, broader, and deeper than anything we can comprehend. When we embrace this truth, our faith is strengthened, and we find peace even in the midst of the storm, knowing that God will always be just and kind as He has promised. As we come to the conclusion of this reflection on God's sovereignty, one undeniable truth stands clear. God has a perfect, sovereign plan for each of us. No matter how many plans we make or obstacles we face, we can be certain that His purpose will prevail. Everything we go through, both the good and the challenging, serves a greater purpose within His divine plan. This understanding invites us to live with confidence, trusting that even when we don't understand why things happen or how they unfold, God is always in control. In the face of trials, it is crucial to commit our ways to the Lord, trusting that He will act according to His will. His plan for us is filled with hope, and even when we cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel, we can rest in the assurance that God is at work, guiding us toward His ultimate purpose. God's love and goodness remain evident even in the darkest moments of our lives. He reminds us that we are never alone. He is with us, sustaining us, and leading us through every challenge. As you reflect on these truths, remember that God has chosen you, predestining you for an eternal purpose that is far greater than we can imagine. Live with the confidence that God is in control of your life, and know that His purpose will prevail. If this message has resonated with you, I invite you to share this video with those who need to hear these words of hope. And if you haven't already, subscribe to join us as we continue to explore the deep truths of God's Word together. May God bless you, and always remember that His purpose will never fail. If you've made it to the end of this video, you are clearly a dedicated person committed to spiritual growth and drawing closer to God. Your willingness to absorb knowledge and apply it in your life is a testament to your determination. Keep seeking wisdom and nurturing your faith. This journey of learning and drawing closer to God is ongoing and deeply rewarding. My videos aim to help people of all ages reconnect with God, rediscovering forgotten teachings, and delving deeper into the divine Word. Comment, "I am closer to God," to let us know that you've come this far and that you are continuing this faith journey with us.